teaching focuses on African American culture. And so, I co-edited a book with Dr. Patterson on the psychic holds of slavery and thinking about the history of slavery and its ongoing impact in the United States. I'm currently working on a radio play that is about the legacy and impact of Hurricane Katrina. And I hosted a conversation with one of our faculty from the Law Center and some other scholars where she talked about Black ecologies and sustainability and how it pertains to Black communities more specifically. And so I raised that as an example because one of the things that African American studies does is it brings scholars and thinkers and activists and world makers together to think about the most pressing issues that are before us in our country, whether it's climate change or the climate crisis, I think is more accurate, or the ongoing impacts of the pandemic. We really try to think about how culture, politics, economics, history inform our ability to form solutions to some of the most pressing questions that we have in society. And certainly the class that Professor Patterson and I are co-teaching this semester, which is called Combating Anti-Black Racism, not only thinks about the histories that led us to this point, but also about how we can teach students to forge solutions, whether it's in terms of policy or grassroots organizing, to confront some of the issues that continue to plague us as a society. Or as President DeGioia, president of Georgetown University, President DeGioia has said, slavery as the original sin of our country and how it continues to manifest and inform our culture today. So it's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm happy to answer any specific questions you might have about the major, the department, my work, my collaborative work with Professor Patterson, or anything else about the department. But I'll just, before I pass things over, I'll say that I think one of the reasons that I said that the department is a flagship is because Georgetown's education is based in the college and the university more broadly is based on a liberal arts mission where students will build connections across the different sectors in which they learn as an undergraduate, from their economics class to their performing arts class. In African American studies, you do that in one class. And so you're able to pull from different sources of knowledge to engage with questions that concern you, that you will hopefully use to take back to your communities or whatever communities that you want to serve once you graduate.
And so this emphasis on, you could hear Professor Colbert say on several occasions about being solution oriented, making solutions, the importance of having solutions. What a degree in African American studies does is it equips you with the analytical skills, be they through your ability to read, to write, to articulate verbally, how the multi-dimensions, for example, of the things she mentioned, so history, politics, etc., the impact that they have had and continue to have. And then we really have in our classes, meaning Professor Colbert's class and my class, together and individually, as well as the variety of classes that the department offers, that is a recurring theme: how to develop systematically solutions. So if you say, part of what we need to do to increase education access in communities is to respond to the housing crisis. What we would ask in African American studies to do is to lay out what it means to respond to the housing crisis. Does that mean, for example, subsidizing into perpetuity at a specified amount Black people's mortgages, et cetera, because of the cumulative effects that redlining had, as an example? Does that mean, when we talk about, if in fact one of the goals is to have a more integrated community, for example, to undo the effects of hypersegregation, what does that then move? Do we then move people out of their houses? Do we then set quotas for the number of people per race who are able to move in? How do you actually enact some of this hard work in these decisions to make the world in a way that actually makes it feasible for Black people, diasporically speaking, to thrive and to have equity? And so sort of a movement toward equity from equality. That's what my work really centers on. Moving away from thinking about treating everyone, quote unquote, the same, to a language of appropriate levels of resources, either from access or throughout, to sort of close some of these diminishing gaps. So I'm sorry, some of these, they're not diminishing. We want to diminish the gaps. These gaps are actually getting larger, much to our chagrin. And so my work has centered on different forms of Black cultural expression. So when I first began, I was working on literature. Now my work my work then moved to other forms of cultural production and primarily music. My historical reference had been the 20th and 21st centuries. My work on the psychic hold of slavery took me back sort of to some of the origins of Black cultural production and history. As research goes, as far as teaching in classes go, I teach from the beginning until this very moment, and we'll talk some more. We'll talk some about the classes. So I'm going to give you a first quiz. It won't be graded, and you don't have to. You can just put it in the chat. Give me the year thereabout. I'll give you. You give me. It'd be plus or minus 5 years. The year that you think African American studies, which in its early iterations was Black studies or in some cases ethnic studies, but that Black studies entered college campuses. Give me, just put it in the chat. Don't be afraid for the wrong answer. I don't see you. I don't know who you are, but I am interested in your participation, which also sort of gives you a clue as to how we've been conducting classes on Zoom, as well as what would happen if we were actually in person. Okay, Freddie. Freddie said the 2000s. What else? Freddie's not the only one. The 90s. Okay, Kesley. I hope I said that correctly. The 70s, Ariana. Alexis, 2005. She gave me a precise year. Okay, now Freddie and Ariana are the closest. Freddie for a different question. And Ariana for the actual answer. So the late 60s, right? So that Black studies arose at the heart of the notable struggles for Black freedom and the Black power and the civil rights movement. So in the late 60s into the early 70s. Now, for the bonus question, why do you think I said that Freddie is right for a different question? If you don't mind, what question might be my next question that could be relevant to this session for this school? If I were writing this out, I would underline this school. That's your clue. So what might the question have been? Let's see, Cassie, let me go on the chat. No more callers. So we have a winner. Exactly. So African American studies, thank you for your participation. African American studies at Georgetown became a program, and we don't have to get into the minutiae of this, an interdisciplinary program in the spring of 2003, right? So sort of 35 years roughly after the first departments began and programs and centers began at colleges and universities. As an interdisciplinary program, African American Studies offered a minor. And a lot of the classes you were able to fulfill in other departments. But in 2016, thanks to the student activism, as well as some other factors, but the same student activism that got African American studies going in the 60s, that was related to these freedom struggles and freedom movements, that activism is what got the minor finally passed provisionally in 2003. And then that activism contributed to the institution of a department. What makes a department unique? Just a couple key features. One, we have more control over the curriculum. So we set the classes that you take. We set the classes that satisfy the major requirement. And we, as the core faculty, the members who are in the department, we also are able to deliver that curriculum to you. There are more resources just in terms of what you're able to take up in terms of as a student for research, for programmatic opportunities to satisfy your intellectual curiosity and appetites. African American Studies, and I'm going to stop and give it to Professor Colbert. African American Studies has contributed to the increase in the number of Black faculty at Georgetown, not only because of the Black faculty members who are in African American Studies and who are hired in that, but because of how the expansion of African American Studies and the broader conversation around race, equity, these certain sort of issues have contributed to an increase in Black faculty in other departments. But African American Studies does, in numbers, have the most Black faculty in the department.
Yeah, certainly in terms of the concentration of Black faculty versus other departments. But I think Professor Patterson is making an important point about how the department has contributed to the diversity of the college, specifically in the main campus more broadly. There's two other points that I want to highlight from the thread that he drew for you from the founding of departments nationally in the late 1960s to the present moment. It's also helpful to know that African American studies departments emerged on college campuses as a discipline, as a mode of thinking, an interdiscipline, as a mode of interdisciplinary thinking in the wake of the civil rights movement. And so part of their founding was in relationship to young people's grassroots movement throughout the United States and throughout the world. And so our current moment is also a time for that we are thinking about the ongoing legacies of African American studies as a field of thought and how it's relating to the movement for Black lives and other movements that are asking for a reckoning with the long history of anti-Black racism in the United States and throughout the world. And so I think that that context of the founding of the department is always at the heart of the work that we do, because we're always concerned not only with the implications of our work in an academic context, but also how they have implications for the wider world in which we live. And certainly, I think that this is special work to be done at Georgetown, given our mission that all of our work throughout the university should be towards the common good as a Jesuit institution. Another way of thinking about that is that we are not thinking about education as happening in a bubble or off on a hill, but rather we're thinking about how the work that we're doing has implications for the communities that we want to serve. And so that's, going back to my earlier point about what is the function of your education if you come to Georgetown. The function is really for you to gain a better sense of the work that you want to do in the world, and then how that work relates to your investment in building a broader change in the world that you want to see. And so African American Studies outside of Georgetown has that as a part of its legacy, and it's animated in particular ways in the nation's capital as we think about, our responsibility to other communities in Washington, D.C., the history of racial dynamics within the city. And, Professor Patterson and I are hosting our colleague, Rosemary Ndugwizu, in our class on Monday, who works on questions around housing. And so that, for example, is a topic that is very pertinent to our local context and thinking about questions of gentrification and the responsibilities of an institution like Georgetown that is the second largest private employer in the District of Columbia. So as an institution, what are our responsibilities to our neighbors and the communities that we're adjacent to? So that's just one specific example. I'm thinking about local context and how African American studies as a field of thought is both specific to our local context, but then has a larger history that we can think about nationally. And so then the other thing that Professor Patterson said that I think is very rich and important is the history of the department specifically, and how it emerged in response in part to the department, not the program, but the department emerged in response to the ongoing racialized violence of the early 20th century, and particularly the death of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and others that continues in our the trial of Derek Chauvin and the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And so those contexts particularize the moment of us building this department. And that work has been happening in concert with the university's slavery, memory, and reconciliation work, as well as the conversations around the Racial Justice Institute, which is being launched in the fall. And so I provide that as a way for you to understand the landscape of conversations that are happening that are in response to our moment, and the potential that you would have in engaging in and building on those conversations as a student here, because certainly, much of that work was in concert with student engagement, activism, and questions that fueled, individual research, but then also the shape of these different projects on campus.
If we had been, and I had, some of this pandemic is, I want to apologize, is making me not mindful of my generally good manners. If we had been in if you all had been at Georgetown this weekend and we were at this session live, we would be in a nice room in the Intercultural Center called ICC, and there would be this nice platform, and our wonderful colleagues from CMEA would be making sure you had snacks and making sure you were where you were supposed to be and feeling good. But the thing that you also would have done, what I would have done at the very beginning, is I would have asked you who you are, right? And where you're from, et cetera. And so if you don't have to come on the video, but if you would not mind telling us, you know, who you are, I would also ask you to say what you're thinking of as a major or minor. I can tell you as another quiz, so you can make an A on this quiz, that there's really only one answer that is correct. Now, it may not be the honest answer, but it is the one answer that would be correct. So if you all would indulge us, tell us who you are, where you're from, you know, and something interesting. And I always modify this in class, inappropriate, that you'd like to share with us. So you're welcome to come in on the video. You don't have to, but I would like to know who's who before we talk about classes and take questions. And I'm also not shy to call on people, so I know how to read. Let me see. Let me go to these names.
I'll start.
Okay.
I'm Alexis. I'm from Bowie, Maryland, which is like 30 minutes from DC. Something interesting, I run track and I'm thinking about majoring in government, but I'm not sure yet.
And majoring in what?
Government.
African American Studies and Government. I know I heard you right. Alexis, are you near the town center?
Yes, like 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm by FedEx Field.
Okay.
See, that's another plus for the major. Thank you. So you run track. Okay, wonderful.
Hi, I'm Kesley. I live in England.
You said
and
London?
I want to minor, yeah, like in England. And I want to major in biology and minor in African American Studies.
See, I knew you got that prize answer right earlier. Wonderful, welcome.
And a fun fact is that I was born in the States. I was born in Florida and I lived in New York, and then we moved to London. So I've lived in England for like 7 years now. And that's my dad walking around in the background.
Hi, Dad.
I can go next. Hi, my name's Ariana Range. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. I'm thinking of majoring in government and or African American studies, or minoring in one of them. And then a fun fact about me is that I share a birthday with my mom, and it's this Tuesday.
Aries season.
Yes.
You're winning around. First of all, I'm just gonna let you start. All I have to say on this matter is you come and take 2 classes in each unit, and then you will have spiritual revelation about what should be the major and what should be the minor. And I see, I used to live in Tallahassee, so I see neither the Seminoles nor the Rattlers were able to claim you. And so we're excited about this possibility of an African American Studies major and or minor. Let's see. Freddie, maybe. Ethan. No, Ethan's gone. Freddie, maybe.
Hello, my name is Freddie. I live in Chicago, and I plan on majoring on global health and minoring in African American studies. And a fun fact about me is I suck at driving, but I still have my license.
You said, but you do have your license?
Yes, somehow.
Yeah. Well, Freddie, I'll just say this to you. There are many students who laughed at this exercise when they said African American Studies, but by the time they went across that stage, African American Studies was on their transcript as several classes, a minor or major. So was that everyone who wanted to share? Okay, perfect. If someone else comes on or you decide later you want to share, we welcome that too. So Suika, I was going to show them the screenshot, I'm going to show them the website, who the faculty are, and then you can talk about some of the classes you teach, some of the classes I teach, and then we will take questions. So start thinking about your questions. Okay, so this is our website. Department of African American Studies. Part of what we have, this is the MLK Memorial, and then we have other icons in African American Studies. We just went to we changed our major recently in terms of what the requirements are. There's not anything to get to bog down in, but if you want to go to the website, you can see that. We did issue a statement on the anti-Asian and anti-Black violence. I think we also issued a statement thinking about COVID, and so this sort of is the main page. It's not sort of, it is. In terms of people, so these are the faculty, the wonderful, illustrious faculty who would be delivering to you to the curriculum. So Professor Lamonda Horton Stallings, she's been the chair for 2 years. Her work centers around the intersections of race and gender and sexuality studies, and thinking about Black culture more broadly. She's been the chair for the last 2 years, and she was finished up at the end of this semester. Right here's Professor Anita Gonzalez. Professor Colbert, Dean Colbert, made reference to the Racial Justice Institute. Professor Gonzalez is a founding member of that institute, but she also is a member of the African American Studies Department, and so she'll be offering courses that would, satisfy the major requirement as well. That's this guy right here, Robert Patterson, who you've seen. In the fall, you'd have the opportunity to take a pre-20th century course about Black life, Black politics, and Black culture with me. In the spring of next year, you'd be able to take a course on race and racism in the criminal justice system, and sort of thinking about, is reform possible to the criminal justice system? If not, what are the other alternatives? Professor Deo Gore, she just joined us this year. Her work centers on Black women's activism on the left. She also teaches courses in Black feminism. There's a required course for the major that students take in their junior or senior year, and she teaches that required course. Professor Zandria Robinson, her work, she has done work on Washington, D.C. She's currently working on a book on music. She has taught courses on Black popular culture. She's also taught the Introduction to African American Studies, and she also teaches a course on Black digital life. Professor Marcus Board, he is I believe he's in his 4th year. His courses center around race and politics. And so he has also taught the Introduction of African American Studies. And there is a program, I think it's called, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Dean Colbert, was the Liberal Arts Seminar or something, the Liberal Arts Seminar, which he's teaching in currently as well, which is an interdisciplinary outlet. Professor Dean Colbert described the Liberal Arts Seminar, because she'll do it much better justice than I will. Professor Rosemary Ndubuizu, her work centers around Black women activism, particularly as it relates to housing and equality. She teaches the Introduction to African American Studies. If you are interested in taking that course this fall, she is the person who would be teaching you when you register. She also teaches a course on radical Black feminism and a course on housing and different types of poverty myths, etc. Oh, look at that smiling face. That is Dean Colbert. She did not mention she also has an appointment in the Department of Performing Arts, where she's on the Theater and Performance Studies side, I think TPSC. And so some of her other courses include a course on writing Black lives. She also has taught a course on Nina Simone, James Baldwin. There's somebody else in that title whose name is escaping me, and what have you. And then Professor Angela Mitchell, who is in the English department, she's teaching a course this fall, I believe, on Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so you sort of see the range, you see how the pieces are coming together for us to deliver what I like to think of as a pretty innovative and particularly relevant curriculum that will give you the content, but more importantly, the skills that you can use in a variety of contexts. And so you don't, so you want to be a lawyer, you can major in African American studies. You want to be a doctor, you can major in African American studies. You want to be a professor, you can major in African American studies. You want to be a politician, you can major in African American studies. Because in addition to the content, which we think is particularly relevant, we are training you with the transferable skills that will serve you well throughout life. And so I'm going to stop sharing with that.
How could you forget about Hansberry?
You know what? The Lord must have taken that away from me, but I'm glad you brought it back to my remembrance. So would you like to tell them about the liberal?
The Ignatius seminar. It's the Ignatius. Yes.
It's an Ignatius seminar. Tell them about that, and then we want your questions.
Yeah. So you will receive some information from the College Dean's Office this summer that highlights a series of freshman seminars that are small classes taught by some of our most esteemed faculty that include experiential learning components. And a subset of those classes are called Ignatius seminars, and Dr. Board teaches one of them. But the exciting thing about them is that they're geared towards smaller class sizes. They're for first year students only. And they're really an opportunity to expose you to research and thinking and the life of the mind. And you get to do that with experiential learning, whether that's having projects that you share with your classmates, going on field trips, or thinking about how some other aspect of the class is animated with on the ground, high touch environment. And so, as you know, we with several other universities throughout the country have been engaged in online learning this year. So our faculty are eager to be back in the classroom with you in the fall. And I'm sure that these activities will also be animated by an eagerness to be back together again and to be in community, because we were unable to gather this fall with our students in first year seminars. And so we're excited to meet you. As Professor Patterson said, normally this would be taking place in person and we would be, getting to see you and get to know you in a live environment, but that will make the moment when we do get to meet you, hopefully this summer or early in the fall, that much sweeter when we get to know you in person for the first time.
So what questions do you all have?
Everybody feel free to either raise your hand if you would like to unmute and come on camera, or send your question to Ask R. Saeed. But we're a small group, and so we're encouraging your engagement and involvement in this conversation. As Dean Colbert and Professor Patterson said, they would love to see you, hear you, get to know you. So this is your opportunity to do so.
The other thing that I'll just say as people are thinking of questions is that I don't know if you all have had the opportunity to visit campus because of the pandemic and because tours have been canceled. But Georgetown, although it may, from its reputation, it may not seem like it is so, but Georgetown's campus is actually pretty small. It's a pretty intimate community. And so I raise that just to say that another hallmark of the work that you would do together is that you would get to know one another, get to know your faculty, get to know the community of your classmates, and you would have a chance to learn as a part of that community. And so whether it's, the events that we host for students throughout the year, to the lectures that we host of guest speakers that students are invited to, there's multiple curricular and extracurricular opportunities to learn and think together as a part of the department.
I'll ask a question. So with the collaboration that you guys alluded to earlier this session, do undergrad students get to work with you guys on the research if they want? And how easy is that for freshmen to come along and join the ride?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Go ahead, Professor Patterson, I'll follow you.
No, I'll say so. Right, so they're different components, and so I'll talk about sort of the in-class and the department things, and then there are university-wide initiatives that actually try to foster those relationships that you're talking about. I think one's called GUROP, but Dean Colbert knows that much better than I do. So so in the classroom itself, part of how you'll get to collaborate is that when you move outside of the sort of general education classes. So by that I mean like the Introduction to African American Studies, which is I would argue is sort of it's not a survey per se, but it is sort of a wide rubric into African American Studies as an interdisciplinary field, or as an interdiscipline. As you move into the more targeted seminars that are related to faculty research, that's one of the first ways you do really get exposed to the faculty research. And the projects you end up doing in the class will, in several cases, say to the faculty member, hey, you know what? I see Ariana has some skills that we could develop further, or she already has these skills and we'll harness them in. And so both Professor Colbert and I have gotten our research assistants who help us with our projects, our book projects, our different projects, from work we've observed in the actual classroom, right? And then there are other venues where you could apply. Let's say a class didn't have this type of project, but you could approach a professor and say, hey, I'm interested in developing my research skills. Do you have any projects I can work on? And for the most part, when you are working with, I don't know about this GUROT program, but this is not volunteer work. Professors have research funds that they could, and I would argue should, use to support you as you're in that endeavor.
Right, so just echoing Professor Patterson, all of my research projects that I've conducted since I was at Georgetown have been supported by undergraduate research assistants. So those range from 2 books that I've published, where students have helped to collect research and, with the formatting and, really help to get the books across the finish line, to, as Professor Patterson mentioned, I'm also jointly appointed in the Department of Performing Arts. And one of the expressions of my research is to provide scholarly feedback for theatrical production, so plays. And so for all of the plays where I've served as a consultant of sorts, it's called a dramaturg in the theater, students have helped me to create the research packets that I've provided for the theaters. They've been named in part of that process. They've participated in talkbacks. They've got to go to rehearsals. They've engaged with the cast. And so they get to see how, the research that a theater scholar does actually impacts the choices that are made in a production. And so for the students who have been involved in that project, they've all had really positive experiences. And I know from the students who participate in talkbacks, the audiences have marveled at how bright our students are at Georgetown. So it's been a mutually positive experience overall. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to engage in those type of projects moving forward. Again, when we're in person. But I would say even as we've been remote, I mentioned earlier that I worked on a radio play this fall about Katrina. And even for that project, students have helped participate in supporting that research, again, by contributing ideas and even giving feedback on how the podcast that I created, which is, the medium in which this piece is taking place, but how the podcast we created should be edited and giving feedback on the draft. So definitely students from first years to seniors have been my research assistants. We also, as Professor Patterson said, at the university, at least the college level, have research opportunities for students from first to 4th years. The one that I would highlight, in addition to the GUROT program, which is a university-wide program for research assistants, in the college we have a program called the Davis Fellows, and it's supported through the generosity of alum and other donors, and it provides students with resources to conduct independent research over the summer. And that research can either be experientially based, or it can be more based in projects they want to pursue. And so some of that has manifested in students participating in internships that they could not otherwise have done because they were unpaid. And so we were able to provide them with the resources to do that work. Again, some of it has an extension of research projects that students have wanted to pursue over the summer leading into their senior year, writing a thesis, for example. And so they start to conduct that research over the summer. Some of it has been archival-based work. So it runs the gamut from, lab-based work to archival-based work. And by lab, in this case, I mean in, our science labs, artistic work, to working with nonprofits, or working in some students have worked on political campaigns, and so forth. And so the Davis Fellows is really a mechanism that we hope will grow to allow every college student at Georgetown to conduct independent research if they want to. But that's certainly something you'll be eligible to apply for once you arrive.
Great question. Any other questions?
Seeing or hearing none.
Well, I would just say that I know it's hard to get a sense of a place from a Zoom meeting, but please know that we are so excited that you are considering coming to Georgetown. Certainly, I can say wholeheartedly that the university is transformed by every class of students that comes here, and your experience will be specific and significant because you'll be entering the university with another class who will be entering the university for the first time. And so, I've been telling the students who are currently here that you're living through history and that there's no way that your generation will be impacted by that. And I think that that will result in you really shifting the culture of Georgetown once you arrive. And so I'm both excited about you individually, but then also as a class, the impact that you'll have once you're here.
Any other last words of advice that you have as the students are trying to discern their decision to come to Georgetown, their major, any other just pieces of advice that you would give folks as they are making this life-changing decision?
It is not to be entered into lightly. No, actually, I would just, I would say it's really just think about you're participating. So on the one hand, Professor Colbert said, Zoom is different than if you were in person. But I would say make sure you go to all of these for whatever schools you might be considering. I would encourage you to think about, not just where I can get the skills that I want from, but where do I think I can see myself? Where do I think I can see myself based on all the resources available, based on geography, based on whatever factors that are important to you at this stage to make that decision. And sometimes it might be making a risk, right? And then sort of also understanding, quite frankly, that if you make a decision and you realize this actually wasn't the right decision, you still have options, right? We have transfer students who will be coming in for the first time too, and we have students who will be transferring for the first time. So I just do sort of the full spectrum. But if you know that this is what you want to do, you can leave off of this session, go sign that form, tell everybody else bye, and start moving to the next season. You don't have to wait till May 1st or April 15th or whatever the day is.
I would concur. I mean, I think that the question of where you can see yourself is really important, where you think you can thrive. My experience is that Georgetown undergraduates are much more cosmopolitan than I was when I was an undergrad, which what I mean by that is, many of my classmates and I spent most of our time in the neighborhood of Georgetown on the hilltop, but our current students, take more fully the opportunity of being in the nation's capital, going to have internships on the Hill, going to visit museums, partaking in our great cultural institutions. And so, I'm sure that you have options in other major cities that have the same types of opportunities. I do think it's distinct that, the university is in the nation's capital and that provides certain opportunities and exciting things. But I also think, again, that, the size of the university and the fact that you would have the chance, if that's something you would desire, to have individualized mentorship with your faculty is something that would particularize your opportunity here.